Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be going over how to make this excavator animation. This tutorial is going to include some more advanced techniques such as how to use animated rigid bodies and how to pick up those objects like you can see in this video right now. So the first thing you're going to need is Minecraft open. I'm using 20W29A snapshot. I know there's more recent versions out, but this is just the one that I've used that I've found is pretty stable for me. So the first thing we're going to need is a world opened. So let's go to single player and go to create new world, and I'm going to go to creative and bring it to peaceful because we don't have to worry about the mobs, and go to more world options, go from default to single biome and hit customize, and I'm going to find a scene that I think would look good, and I think that the flower forest will probably look interesting. So just hit done, and I'm going to save this as excavator world. Let's see if I can spell or not. Maybe that's right, maybe it isn't. And just hit create new world. As you can see, it's coming up here real quick. And there it is. So now we have this world here, our flower forest. So we're going to want to fly around and find a place that would be good for this animation. And a nice flat area like this is probably going to look nice. So what we're going to need to do is, like the last tutorial with the chain one, we need to start setting up the blocks of what we're going to have in our animation. So what you're going to want to do is, if it's always helpful to have a reference image, so find a picture of an excavator. For instance, I'm using this one right here, and I'm gonna try to think about how I would make that in Blender along with in Minecraft. And as you could see in that animation, the blocks aren't necessarily working the same way they would in Minecraft. You couldn't necessarily build this in Minecraft, but it definitely looks like something that would be like a modded Minecraft thing. So we're gonna need some sort of yellow block that's relatively smooth and nice and bright. So this yellow concrete looks good, and I'm gonna place that down, and like we did with the chain tutorial, just bring it one block off the ground so it's easy to move later. We're gonna need some glass, maybe just like a light gray stained glass will probably look good. So just bring that right over here. Something for the bucket. In this picture the bucket's yellow, but in a lot of things I've seen it as more of a gray, so I'm going to use an iron block for that. I think that'll look good. Just bring that right over there. And then for the last thing, we need to look at those treads down there, as far as the main details go. And for the treads, we're going to need some sort of black material. So maybe this black concrete, and let's bring in some black stone. That we have some more stuff to play around with later, if we feel like we want to change our material. And then also you can see there's some little red parts on the image, so I'm just going to bring in red terracotta so we can play around with that for details or anything else that we need. So I'm just going to clear my inventory out. That makes it nice and simple for me. And then the last thing that we're going to need before we jump into Blender in this one, it's a quite simple one Minecraft wise, is we're going to need to grab a thing for the rubble, whether you want one block or multiple blocks. I want something probably like cobblestone, stone, andesite, and you can see I'm kind of avoiding some of the more smooth things because those are more polished, and you don't usually see an excavator picking up those kind of things. And 3 blocks will probably be good enough for this scene. So let's just kind of bring them over, and like we are doing, we're separating them out all by 1 block. That way when we're in Blender, it's really easy to change. So now you got to think to yourself if you're going to want anything different in the scene. Do you want anything in the background, in the foreground? Is there anything that you think could draw the attention more to the excavator? So if we kind of look right here in the middle of the screen, that middle third, you can see that's where our excavator is going to be. And you want to notice that we're kind of got 2 trees on either side, kind of isolate it from the rest of the scene pretty well. Along with that water in the background will probably add a nice contrast to the yellow as the water is blue. And I think that everything will be pretty good here. We have all these blocks, so we can always move it around in Blender more later. But I think we're good here. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to Mineways real quick, and I'll meet you there. Alright, so now we got Mineways open, and like we did with the last tutorial, that chain physics one, we need to get our world up. So let's do File, Open World, and come over to our world, which we named Excavator World. So there it is right there, and click on it. And this is relatively easy since we started nearby, but if you can not find your scene, just go View and jump to Player, and that will go wherever your player's standing. You can see all of our blocks in there that we want in our scene. So we want a relatively big area since there's this water around it. So I'm going to grab this right here. You can always grab a bigger or smaller section depending on how powerful your computer is. And like the last one, this information comes up, and we want to hit yes. You pretty much always want to hit yes. And I'm just going to export my world for rendering. So File, Export World, and then choose for rendering. So as you can see, this menu comes up. These are the settings I use. I think these are the default ones, but they should work for you all, so just go ahead and hit OK on them. And then you can see on the bottom here, it is loading our world, and get to the end there, and it is done. So now come back to Blender. Everything is now going to be done inside Blender, and you can see I've already set up a simple scene here. I've saved the scene. I've already given a world excavator thing. I get very creative with my titles sometimes, and I've taken everything out of the scene. So the first thing you'll notice is that it looks like a regular Blender scene, but we might want that reference image for our excavator, and you can pull it up on a phone or a separate screen or laptop or whatever, but if you want it here and easy to access, click this little button right here, actually this one to the left, sorry, and hit Image Editor, and then you can open an image from your computer. Alright, so now our image is opened right here. We can kind of zoom out and maybe move the menu around a little bit, and there's our excavator. You can see it, and now we have a nice reference image up in the corner while we're working, and that always helps a lot. So go ahead and hit End and open your MC Prep add-on and OBJ World Import and import that world. Alrighty, now that you can see our world is imported, there's what we were working on in Minecraft right there. And if I go press Z and then 2 for material preview, you can see all of our blocks, but like last time they're blurry. So let's hit Prep Materials and then unclick Improve UI. You can do that if you want, but I personally don't like the look of it, and hit OK. And now all of our blocks are looking good. But if we go into rendered view, you can see everything looks kind of dull. There's not much light to it, and there aren't any shadows or anything. So go ahead and switch from Eevee to Cycles. And if you have a GPU for your device, I suggest switching to it. It's almost always better. It'll go faster. I'm going to hit Z and 6 again to go back to solid view. And then let's go down to our world settings. And like the last one, you want to open an environment texture and download an HDRI and throw that into your scene. Alright, so now you can see that I have the HDRI in the scene. If I hit Z and 8 for rendered view, you can see that everything now has those nice shadows that we were talking about earlier. The only problem is we can actually see the image, and you might not want that. So go ahead and hit Film and then Transparent, and that's going to keep all your shadows and stuff, but it's going to remove the background, so it's a lot easier to see what's going on. So let's go back and hit Z and 2 for material preview again, and let's head down to these blocks. And I just hit Tab to go into edit mode real quick. Now everything's selected and we don't want that, so just click off of it to unselect everything. And go up here to the face select. And then give it a second because it's a big scene. And then we're going to kind of shift click on all the faces of our blocks. So I'm just going to go through that real quick and give you a nice time lapse of me selecting all the blocks. Alrighty, now you can see I have everything selected, and I switched to solid view about halfway through there because it was getting kind of confusing to see what was selected and what wasn't. So I'm going to go back into material preview and see that, yep, all of our blocks are selected. We're good there. So let's hit P and by loose parts. So that's the separate. Actually, not loose parts, sorry, by selection. So we just selected all those blocks. And then just give it a second. And now all of our blocks are selected. So that's great. So we can hit tab to go back out of edit mode. And you can see if we click on these blocks, they're now separate. But we want all the blocks to be separate from each other. So let's hit tab again. And now we have just the blocks selected. I hit A to select everything. And then hit P and by loose parts. And then right click and set the origin to geometry. And now we have all the blocks are separate and we can do whatever we want with them. So you can see if we go into rendered view here, everything looks the same. It's just that all of our blocks are now separate. So now we have to start building that excavator. And we got this reference image here. And I'm just going to hide the rest of the world real quick just so it's kind of easier to see what we're doing. And since we already know that these blocks over here are rubble, we can go ahead and hide those also. And then we're just going to work on the body right now. So let's kind of move all of these blocks. We're just going to hide them also by hitting H. And now I'm going to start work on the body. So you can kind of do whatever shape you want. I'm just going to time-lapse me making it. And yeah. Alrighty, so now we're back, and you can see I got the main part of the body done. There's definitely some more work to do, but I think it's mostly done at this point. You can see I actually messed up on this part right here. The fact that the cabin where the person would sit on the excavator actually doesn't come all the way to the side, because the arm needs to go there. So I just gotta fix that up real quick. It's always okay to make mistakes, especially in a program like Blender where you gotta Control Z. It's a great time to learn how to use a 3D modeling program. So you can see I brought it more to the side, and now it's looking a little bit more like an excavator. And now we just need to do the arm here. So we got 3 main pieces going on. So the first one is this main arm right here. The second one is this, and the third is the bucket. So I'm just gonna go down the list. We got 1, 2, and 3, and I'm gonna start on the arm. So another time lapse. Here we go. Alrighty, so now we're back, and we have the excavator first part of the arm, and we just need to do the second part. And yeah, you can do that however you want, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do it again. Alrighty, now the second part of the arm is done. If we go into rendered view, you can see this starting to look more like an excavator by the minute. And the last thing we gotta do is the bucket. So I think I'm gonna explain a little bit more on this one, because this one requires some understanding of the physics on how you're gonna want to approach making your bucket. So you can see I duplicated the iron block over here. I'm gonna hit Shift S and cursor to selected, and then Shift S and selection to cursor, so we can kind of parent the bucket to the end here. And basically, we got to make a scoop, but we want to make it as simple as possible because that will make the physics work the best. So go ahead and go to your side view here and grab your bucket and kind of scale it up a little bit. And then I'm going to scale it back down on the Y. And I'm just kind of trying to follow the shape of the bucket. So the bucket is facing inwards towards the excavator. So let's scale on the Z and start to make a little bit of that bucket shape, as you can see in the picture. And don't want to go too far too fast, but now we got the main part of the bucket there, and it's a little bit wide, but that's always can be solved by our scaling later on. And then we want to go and basically complete this edge right here, and that's going to be kind of hard. So let's bring our iron block back to the side here and start to kind of manipulate our iron block into shape. So we're gonna have to start making a shape here that doesn't really follow the laws of Minecraft, because Minecraft is all cubes and it's sometimes hard to make something out of just cubes. So you can see we got this side here, but our bucket is overlapping too much. So kind of scale on that direction. and you can see we got part of the bucket done. I'm gonna duplicate and bring it to the other side here, and this is where things are gonna start to get a little bit tricky. So we're gonna go into edit mode by hitting tab and select these two faces up here by doing a box select, and then we're gonna warp it down. And I know what you're thinking, this isn't Minecraft anymore, but you're right. We just have to make a couple of changes to kind of make it more realistic to how an excavator works. Let's hit Control R to add in an edge loop here, kind of put it in the middle, and then position this to that edge right there. And I know that isn't exactly Minecraft because we have a shape that isn't square, but it's sometimes necessary to make your bucket more bucket shaped or whatever you're trying to make. And in this instance right here, it's surrounded by a bunch of other cubes, so you can definitely still tell it's Minecraft. This would be achievable with just cubes, but it would sometimes distract from the shape, or it might just not look as good in general or be way too hard. So now you can see we have the bucket on the end there, and it's just a little bit too big, so I'm going to select every single piece of it and scale it down. There we go. So the last thing we got to do before we add the treads on is kind of animate and add physics to all this, because we don't know exactly how we want the treads to move, but we know roughly how we want the rest of it to move. So let's just get all that working real quick. So this is one solid arm right here, and so I'm just gonna box select all this after selecting one and hit Control J, and now you can see that we have the arm, and if we rotate it on the x-axis, the arm moves, but we want it to pivot more down at the bottom here because that's how it would work in real life. So let's go tab for edit mode and hit A to select everything. And this little orange dot is your pivot point and your center of mass and everything like that. So let's hit G to select everything and bring the arm to right there. And now if we bring it back down, it pivots on the spot that we want. And so we're going to do the same thing over here for the second arm. Is select one, hit Control J, and then go into edit mode by hitting tab and bring everything down to right there, because that's where we want it to rotate. So now you can see our arm rotates in the correct spot. We actually need to move it a little bit to the side because it's going to be rotating like that. And then the last bucket shape, since that's going to actually be touching the materials, I'm going to wait just a second on that to show you how that works. But first what we need to do is hit Control P and then Object. And now you can see when we rotate this, the whole arm rotates with it. And then if we want the arm to rotate like that, and the arm comes back down, it works how you'd expect it, and you can animate it easier. So I'm hitting Control Z a bunch to bring everything back down to how it was. There we go. So what we need to do now is add physics to this down here, the bucket. The bucket's what's going to actually be touching the blocks, and it's a little bit too skinny right now. I did that wrong earlier, so let's scale it back out a little bit so it has some more picking up room. And let's start adding some physics to this. So rigid body, and then I'm going to hit 12 kilograms, sounds good. Turn off dynamic, and then turn on animated. And now you can see that this has physics on it, but it isn't moving at all. And what we're going to do is actually select the whole bucket and hit Control J. And now you can see it all has that, and hit Tab, A, and then P by loose parts. And now what we've basically done is we've added the physics to all of these objects, but by only giving it to one. And that's a handy tip that you can do sometimes. And then select everything and then click on this piece right here. And that, you can see it's outlined in orange. That's your active object. So hit Control P to object. And now you can see if we were to move this, the whole bucket moves. And then what we want to do is Control P to this object. And now our bucket is parented to our machine. And now everything's pretty much working at this point. And the last thing we need to do is give this our rotation point, which is going to be right around here. So let's join these two objects, set their origin to geometry, and then let's kind of bring all this stuff up out of the way. And then you can see that this is our middle object. We have it selected, and then Control P to object. So now whenever we rotate this or move it, the whole thing moves with it. And we can bring the arm back down and then parent this arm to this object, and now our excavator moves how you'd expect it. And if it moves or whatever, everything's gonna work. So you can see this is starting to look more and more like an excavator by the minute. The main thing we need to add now is the treads and the physics, and we'll be done. And then we can start animating it and rendering it. So I'm gonna hit Alt Hide to show our scene again, so we can start figuring out what we want to do. So let's select our excavator and bring it down a little bit. So we kind of got to figure out how far it's going to be off the ground and how big it is. So right now it looks a little bit small because that's a flower and that's the excavator. So it needs to be a little bit bigger. We don't want to make it too big to the point where it's crazy. So maybe right around there will work. And let's just bring it to where we think the treads would be. And you can see our scoop is intersecting with the ground. So let's rotate that upwards and then downwards again to get our excavator into just kind of like a resting position. And I'm going to hit Shift S, cursor to world origin. That way it goes back to where I expect it to be. And I'm going to hide our scene again. And hide our rubble. And now we need to add in the treads. So I can start hiding everything that we don't need. And we just need the treads down there. So the first thing we need to do is hit Shift D, and I'm going to hit 7 to go into top view and bring our object into the middle, and then scale it up, scale on the Y to kind of get that shape of it, and then scale down on the Z. And now that is kind of just our middle bottom section that the treads are going to attach to. And then now basically we need to make both sides of the treads. So I'm bringing those down out of the way. I'm hitting 3 to go to side view. I'm going to bring one of these bricks up by hitting Shift D, and this is going to kind of become our middle. So you can see we kind of have the 2 wheels on either side. So there's going to be 2 big ones on either side, and then we need that bar across the middle. So Shift D, bring this bad boy down to the middle there, and add an array modifier in, and move the relative offset to go on the side there. So as you can see, we are starting to get that bar in the middle. So just kind of bring that up to the right amount. 8 should work right there, and hit apply. And set origin to geometry. This isn't needed, it just kind of makes it easier to see. And now these are a little bit too thick, so I'm going to kind of scale them down till they're the right size. And then move this whole thing in towards the middle just to kind of get an idea. Bring it down, bring it down. Now you can see that we have the bar in there. All we need is the treads now. And so I'm going to use the black concrete here for the treads. So like we did earlier, hit Shift D and add in that modifier. And let's hit Shift S and cursor to select it. And now we have this cursor right on there. And let's add in a curve and a circle. And then rotate that on the Y-axis. And you can see that we have our circle now. And hit Tab to go into edit mode. We're going to start editing this circle. This is what our track is going to follow. So I'm just going to kind of drag this track outwards like that, and then squeeze this inwards like so. And then these are a little bit too high, so I'm going to do that and bring those down a little bit. And then we don't want it to be too rounded there, so scale these on the Y to kind of sharpen off that corner. Now you can see we have our treads, or at least where our treads are going to go. So now we just need to make a tread. So we have our block here. Let's scale it out on the X, and then scale it down to how big our tread's going to be. And if you hit period, it'll center on that so we can see it really easily. And hit Shift D, and I'm just going to kind of scale it down a little bit, and then move it to the side, and hit Control J, and set the origin to geometry. And now we have one tread piece, but what we need is a bunch of tread pieces on this curve right here. So I'm going to bring it up and add in an array modifier, and as you can see, we've started to array it. We have our treads are starting to go, but they're not following that path, and that's why we need to add in this curve modifier right here, and then select our curve. And you can see things have started to mess up. So we're going to want to choose one of these deformation axes down here. Hit Y and Z. So the Y started to look good, like it was following it, but something was off. So you can see if we rotate on the Y-axis 90 degrees, now it works. So we're going to want to bring that in. You kind of got to move around. It's sometimes really weird. If I move it on the Z-axis, it actually moves on the X-axis. If I scale on the Z-axis, it'll move it there. So I'm just kind of moving it into place, and as you can see, it hasn't connected quite yet. And there we go, and you can see down here 170 makes a perfect around, and you can see if we move it on the Y-axis, it actually rotates, and that's what's really cool about this. This means we can actually make our machine drive. So what we want to do is just grab everything here. That includes the curve. You can see I didn't have it. I'm doing a box select. We have the curve, we have the middle, we have this, and we need all, oops, sorry. We need all of these, and then we're just going to parent it to the middle section, and then we're going to reselect these back without the middle section, and move it over to the side, and then scale on the x-axis -1, and that's going to flip it. And now you can see, if we parent this to our middle object that we made earlier, everything moves accordingly. The only thing that we're going to have to manually animate is these treads down here by moving them on the y-axis. And that is something I believe that you could make Blender automatically do, but that would be too complicated. For such a simple scene like this, it'll be easier just to manually do it. So now let's hit Alt-H and see what our excavator looks like. Let's select the world and bring it down a little bit so our excavator is sitting on the ground how we'd expect it. And let's see what this looks like real quick. Let's select all these blocks and move them out of the way. I'm curious what this looks like in the scene. Is it too big, too small? Is there anything we need to change? Kind of think how our camera is going to be positioned. And go into rendered view by hitting Z and then 8. And I think that looks pretty good. There are definitely small changes that could be made, but for the simplicity of this tutorial, I'm going to keep it like that. And let's start animating this. So the first thing we're going to need to do is add in physics. So you can see I have the world selected. I'm going to go into rigid body and then give it a mass of maybe 2,000 kilograms, turn off dynamic, and turn on mesh. And now we have our physics, but all these blocks need physics. So we can just give it a mass of 2 kilograms and make it a cube. That's going to make the math a lot easier for the computer versus a convex hull. It's just a lot less math to calculate. And now you can see that our objects, although slowly, act how you'd expect them, except they don't pass through the water because our water is part of the main scene, which is completely solid. So if you ever want the objects to pass through the water, just make sure that the water is not part of those physics. So let's move these up and start making our rubble pile. So I'm actually going to kind of hide this so it's easier to see and start pulling down blocks. And basically, sorry, I'm going to actually go into top view. We're basically just going to put all these blocks in here. And what we got to do is make sure that we're just going to kind of drop them down. That's the idea that I'm having for making this rubble pile work. Basically, if we just drop them randomly, it should make a pretty convincing random pile of stuff, and we should be able to make it feel like that's how we place them. So go ahead and go back into this view, and you can see that our tree is in the way. That's why you always kind of want to look what's around you. So let's hit hide and bring these back over to the side, and still in that tree. I can't seem to get away from this tree. So let's hide that tree again and bring all of our objects right there. And there we go. Now it's not in the way. So if we hit play, you'll see that our objects are going to start to fall. This one cube kind of fell out, and the reasoning for that is because this piece of grass right here was in the way. So if anything's in the way, this flower and these two pieces of grass, just hit tab and then go into your face select view and just select these guys down here real quick. One, if my computer will do it. Alright, 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2. And then like early, we do P by selection. and then give it a second, and then reselect just these guys and turn off their rigid bodies. So now objects can pass straight through them, and we shouldn't have any problems with that. So you can see our rubble pile starting to form there. There's a couple problems. Hey, one landed right in the thing. That's great. They're kind of passing straight through the treads on this, and we don't want that. So I've decided that I want more of a controlled rubble pile. So what I'm going to do is actually select all of these. I'm going to hide it so it's easier to select, and select all of these that we don't need. There we go. And I'm just going to make a little tower of the blocks. I feel like that'll be easier to control and maybe a little bit easier to show our machine picking up. So we can go ahead and bring it down to the ground, and now we've got our excavator. So if we hit play, you'll see that the blocks are now just in that pile, and we're going to use the excavator to pick them up. So now comes the fun part. This is the animation. So the first thing our bucket needs to do is kind of move behind it. So I'm going to insert a keyframe for this for location, rotation, and scale. And then it's just going to kind of stay still at the start, and then it's going to kind of move over to the side like that. And you can see that our machine moves over to the side. And if we've done everything right, this bucket should collide with those objects, and it should kind of push them out of the way. You can see our excavator is working how you'd expect it to. But we don't want that quite yet. We need the excavator to not push them out of the way. So we want to rotate it on the x-axis here, and you can see it's kind of moved to the side, so we might have to reposition that there. And now our excavator is kind of positioned how I want. So if we replay this, you'll see that the excavator kind of moves its arm out, and hopefully a relatively convincing way. That's how it's going to look in real time. And then I'm just going to make it kind of pause for a second, and then it's going to bring all those materials into its scoop there. So it's going to scoop it like that, along with there you can see the scoop has moved, and I'm going to kind of move that up just so we can demonstrate that everything on this can move. And there we go. There we go. And I failed to put in a keyframe earlier, so that needs to be changed. I need to move this back down to right there. And you can see now if we watch it, our excavator should move it outwards. It should pause for a second, and then it should try to scoop all those materials up. You can see it got one of them, it didn't get the other, and that kind of slid out at the end, and that's a problem. So let's change that real quick. Basically what we're going to do is put in a keyframe for the bucket right here, and then we want it to kind of that messed up. We want it to, I don't know why it's doing that. Our thing's being really weird right now. Real quick. So basically we want the bucket to move that way, but we need it to kind of scoop up. So for some reason it keeps moving to the side like that, which is really a problem. So what I'm going to do to actually solve this is get rid of the parent. Actually just on the bucket, actually. I did that wrong. Just the bucket here. Clear the parent. And then what we know is on frame 70, the bucket is going to look like this. And then on frame 110, it's going to be scooping up like that. So if we bring it back and then parent it to the object like so. Now it should scoop how we want it to, except it's way up there, and that's a problem. So what we actually need to do is bring this bucket get rid of its keyframes and bring it back down. And hopefully what this is going to do is maybe reset the animation, because you could see it was kind of being all weird there. And it's still doing that. I honestly have no idea why it would be being so weird. I'm going to see if I could then move it back into position. Kind of. I honestly don't know why it's doing this. I'm just going to not animate the bucket for now, as we're having some technical difficulties, as you can see with it. And I do come across these pretty much every time I'm making an animation. So if this happens to you, don't worry. It's nothing new. Sometimes you might want to put the time into figuring out what is the problem, but sometimes you might just want to kind of adapt the rest of the scene to working. So if you can see here, our excavator, like before, will kind of move out to the side, but we're hitting the blocks. So we need to change that, what's going wrong here. So it looks like our bucket, first of all, sorry, I keep forgetting I can't edit the bucket without it freaking out. So basically our bucket is currently moving like that. But you can see it's kind of passing through the pile, which is a problem, meaning that this right here needs to come out further, like that. And now, if we play the animation, it will come around to the side, and it'll come through as expected, except that our objects are not getting scooped up because the bucket is not in the right position. So this arm here needs to, at the same time as this bucket is moving, come downwards. And if we redo this animation, we should hopefully see that it's working a little bit better. And move through. There we go. Now it got one of the blocks, and that's just mainly what I wanted it to do. And that's pretty much the whole animation there. You can see our machine comes through and it grabs a block. Now all we need to do is animate those treads. So that should be pretty easy, at least hopefully. So let's go to frame 20 and insert our keyframe, and then it rotates till frame 50. And we know that this tread right here is going backwards, so we got to figure out roughly what direction that's going to be. So that means it's going to be going that way. But also at the same time, we got to keep it on that object. And this is where you got to kind of play around with the settings a little bit. What might be helpful is if we clear this parent here first, that way nothing's moving, and then we can easily maneuver these into place how we want. So we got to think, is that going to be the right speed? That looks way too fast right now, so I'm going to undo some of the movement on it so that it moves differently. So basically want it to slowly move backwards. So there we go. That's one side, and then we just got to insert the keyframe for the other side, and this one's going to move forwards about the same distance. And then what we can do is we can reparent this to the object, and these should be so small and moving so fast that if they're not moving at the right speed, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So as you can see here, if we watch it in regular speed, the treads look like they're moving correctly, and that's really all that matters when you're using one of these animations. So yeah, now we got our excavator there, and that's actually about it for the scene. Just go ahead and come down to your rigid body world and bake your physics just to make sure everything's working. But besides that, I think that's all there is for this episode. Hope you've enjoyed. If you did, that's great. Have a wonderful day.